Imagine this. You go on a camping trip, everything is going perfectly. Until two of your friends wander into the woods and return hours later, remembering nothing. But what if the ones who came back weren't really them? Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and like the video to dive deeper into the story. Let's get started. Asterisk. This happened in the summer of 2018 when our group of friends went camping in Oregon. Until that night, we had never had a bad experience while camping. But what we experienced that night changed us forever. There were 6 of us. Me, Jason, my girlfriend Emily, my best friend Mark and his cousin Josh, along with Sarah and David. Our campsite was in a small clearing at the base of the mountains, surrounded by tall pine trees. There was no phone signal, but that wasn't a problem for us. In fact, we were excited to disconnect and be one with nature. The first day was perfect. We swam in the lake during the day and sang songs around the campfire at night. Around midnight, as we were getting ready to sleep, we heard something moving in the forest. Normally, we wouldn't think much of it, but this time, it felt different. The sounds were strange. It was as if a person was trying to mimic an animal. First an owl, then a wolf. But the tone was unnatural, almost as if it was echoing from nowhere. Mark and Josh gathered their courage and went to check where the sound was coming from. We stayed behind, waiting. Minutes passed, but they didn't return. At first, we thought they were playing a prank on us. They loved doing things like that. But after an hour, we started to worry. We grabbed our flashlights and went to look for them. Just a few meters from our campsite, we found 2 tent stakes lying on the ground and Mark's flashlight. But there was no sign of them. Stranger still, there were no footprints or any signs of a struggle. We were panicking when, suddenly, 2 figures emerged from the woods. It was Mark and Josh. But something was off. Their eyes were wide open, staring blankly at us. They didn't say a word. They just walked straight to their tent and went to sleep. When we asked them what had happened, they didn't even respond. The scariest part was the next morning. When they woke up, they had no memory of what had happened. When we asked, "Where did you go?" they just stared at us blankly and said, "What are you talking about?" We never left. Later that day, while packing up our tents, we noticed something on Mark's back. His shirt had a muddy handprint, larger than a human's, but not quite like a bear's. That second night, we didn't sleep. But nothing happened. At first light, we packed up and left. Since that day, whenever we bring up that night, Mark and Josh insist they remember nothing. But we know the truth. That night, something took them and gave them back. This incident happened in the summer of 2015 at a remote campsite in Wyoming, and to this day, we still can't forget it. Back then, we had just graduated from college and wanted to go on one last adventure together. Our plan was simple. Set up camp deep in the forest and spend a few days completely disconnected from the world. But one night, we realized that nature had far greater secrets than we could ever imagine. There were 6 of us. Me, Daniel, my girlfriend Lisa, and our friends Mike, Eric, Jenna, and Sam. Everything was going perfectly. We sat around the fire, talked, watched the stars, and had a few drinks. But around midnight, we noticed someone sitting just beyond our campsite. At first, I thought it was one of us, but then I realized we didn't have an extra person in our group. The man, dressed in torn and dirty clothes, sat on a log with an old backpack, staring into the fire without moving. "Hey man, you okay?" I called out. The man slowly lifted his head. His face was dirty, his beard unkempt, but the strangest thing was his eyes. They were empty, like there was nothing behind them. Then, in a whisper-like voice, he said, "You're not supposed to be here." Mike laughed. "Dude, This is a public campsite. We can be here just as much as you can." The man didn't react. A tense silence fell over us. Then Lisa asked, "Are you camping alone?" The man shook his head and quietly said, "No, I'm not alone. But you think you are." The second I heard that, something inside me felt deeply unsettled. He didn't say anything else, just kept staring into the fire. After a while, we stopped trying to talk to him and decided to go to our tents. But something in me told me to keep an eye on him. I was jolted awake at dawn by a terrified scream. Jenna was standing in the middle of our campsite, breathing heavily. "He's gone," she shouted. I rushed out of my tent. The man had vanished. But he left something behind. On the log where he had been sitting, there was an old, dirty note. It had only one sentence written on it. "You were watching me, weren't you? But I was watching you too. What you should really be afraid of is the others who were watching you as well." None of us ever went camping again after that night, because we never truly understood what he meant. Or maybe we didn't want to. In the fall of 2017, four friends decided to go camping for the weekend in one of North Carolina's forested areas. We planned to hike through nature and spend the night under the stars. However, none of us remembered that night clearly, as we were strangely affected by what happened. I, Alex, my girlfriend Clara, my close friend Ethan, and his brother Lucas arrived at our campsite, and everything was perfect. The warmth of the morning sun, the tranquility of the forest, even the bird songs in the air. Everything was beautiful. While we were sitting around the campfire chatting, Lucas noticed something odd. The stars in the sky looked different from usual. They were much brighter, almost unnaturally close. "These stars look bigger and closer," he said. "I've never seen them like this before." We all looked up at the sky, and sure enough, the stars appeared to shine in a way we hadn't seen before. Clara commented, "Maybe it's the effect of the atmosphere." But something inside me told me that explanation wasn't enough. As the night went on, the oddness increased. The stars wouldn't stay still. Some of them moved across the sky, but they weren't meteors or any natural event. Squinting and looking closely, we realized the stars were forming patterns. Our minds struggled to accept it, but the stars were definitely creating a design. It almost felt like a message written in the sky. Ethan said, "This is definitely not normal." At that moment, we all felt a chill. We planned to sleep through the night, but none of us could. We stayed awake for hours, eyes on the sky and ears tuned to every faint sound. By morning, we noticed something even stranger. We couldn't remember anything from the later hours of the night. What time was it? What stars had we seen? What had we talked about? We couldn't remember a thing. It was as if that night, that sky, had been completely wiped from our minds. More than a week passed. As I reflected on that camping trip, I had a feeling deep inside. The stars hadn't just moved in the sky. That night, something had tried to communicate with us. But perhaps that message wasn't something we were meant to understand. Now, every night when I look up at the sky, I feel like something is still lost among those shining stars. Sometimes I feel scared. What really happened that night? In the summer of 2019, my four friends and I decided to go camping in the deep forests of Oregon. We all loved nature, and this seemed like the perfect opportunity to get away from the noise of the city. However, the few days we spent there turned into one of the strangest and most terrifying experiences of our lives. I, Liam, my girlfriend Sophie, my best friend Jack, his sister Ava, and our other friend Ben arrived at a campsite in the forest. During the day, we hiked, swam in the lake, and sang songs around the campfire in the evening. Everything was normal, until the strange event that happened before nightfall. That evening, as the sun set, we began hearing an odd noise coming from the depths of the forest. At first, we thought it was just wind or an animal, but the sounds became more distinct and sharper. It was like a rustling noise, but with a chilling tone. Maybe it's a wild animal, I thought, but I noticed the sounds were too regular. It felt like something, or someone, was moving in the forest. Jack asked, "Am I the only one hearing this?" We all tried to follow the direction of the sound, but there was only the darkness of the forest. With the cool air, a wave of fear washed over me. When Ava heard the sound, she said, "There's something out there," and at that moment, we all tensed up. We decided to create a safe space to spend the night, but making that decision led to everything quickly going wrong. As we settled near the campfire, we noticed something strange moving around our tents. When we returned to our tents, Sophie claimed to have seen a shadow deep in the forest. "Something moved," she said, but we didn't believe her. None of us slept that night. We stayed awake, staring into the fire, anxiously waiting for something to appear. By morning, everyone's eyes were bloodshot. But deep within the forest, we still felt the presence of something. While packing up the tents, we saw a slightly raised patch of ground near Jack's backpack. It looked like someone had been sitting there for a long time. The cold air made the situation even stranger. No one could explain the patch, but we all decided it was time to leave. As we left the campsite, Ava realized her phone was missing. However, a few days later, it reappeared, but strangely, the phone had no history. The call logs were erased, the messages were gone. There was only one message: "You forgot us, but we haven't forgotten you." Since that day, none of us have dared to return to that forest. Forgetting that night and what we experienced in the forest's depths was probably the biggest mistake of our lives.